everybody. I'll be moderating today, so if you have any questions, feel free to shoot them my way or put them in the chat and we'll make sure that they get answered. But I'm here to happily introduce you to Valerie Slater. She's a juvenile justice attorney. She's also the executive director of the Rise for Youth organization. That organization does amazing work advocating for the rights of youth and families facing justice system involvement, or youth and families who are engaged in other systems that are charged with the care of the Commonwealth's youth. Valerie earned her JD from the University of Richmond Law School and her bachelor's from Colorado State. She's a very fierce advocate for children, and she brings to her work an unwavering commitment to strengthening youth and communities to lead the efforts to realize their visions for change. So join me in welcoming Valerie. We're looking forward to an awesome conversation this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you, Jesse. It's good to be back with you all this afternoon. And yeah, I think let's jump in. I want to say hello to Steve. Hey, good to see you, kind of, from my dLCV days. Okay, I am going to share my screen so that I can start the presentation. Oh gosh, and it is, I'm going to hit escape. I apologize for that. It is not on the first slide. It is now. There we go. Let's try that again. Take two. You've already heard me introduce. I'm Valerie Slater, and today we're going to be talking about addressing disproportionate disciplinary actions in schools against minorities with disabilities. You've already heard who we are, who Rise for Youth is. And so now let's jump in. We're going to define and outline the problem, beginning with what is exclusionary discipline. So according to the American Psychological Association, it encompasses any type of school disciplinary action that removes or excludes students from his or her usual educational setting. So under this definition, I'm going to stop right there for just a second. It says, if it removes or excludes a student from his or her usual educational setting, under this definition, seclusion and restraint would apply. You know, we often think about exclusionary discipline as a kid being removed from school, but for a child to be in a space that is not their usual educational setting, if this definition holds, then that would mean a child that's been placed in a seclusion room is no longer in their usual educational setting. Well, seclusion would work, but restraint would not, depending on where a child is restrained. But I just want us to keep that in the back of our mind as we talk about removing or getting rid of exclusionary discipline practices, because we are often looking at seclusion and restraint as if they're separate and apart, and I don't believe they are. I believe that when we are looking to really make meaningful change for students with disabilities, students who are minorities, all students who are subjected to excessive disciplinary practices or excessive exclusion from school, we have got to be looking at every instance to include seclusion and restraint. So so further, this says that the United States Government Accountability Office illustrates that students of color, boys and students with disabilities are the most often to experience the significant punitive actions. So if we know that these are practices that are being wielded against boys, children of color, children with disabilities disproportionately, that means if we don't know how to, it's wrong regardless, but if we do not know how to appropriately and equitably apply any practice, we ought not be using it. If it becomes a tool against a particular class of people, we ought not use it. So in my humble opinion, that is 2 to 3 reasons why exclusionary discipline has got to be removed. And then, so the disproportionality portion, there are certain systemic educational practices that put students of color, boys, and students with disabilities at a higher risk of being more severely disciplined. And that leads to higher rates of academic failure and of incarceration. So again, here we are with these outcomes, these disproportionate outcomes, these disproportionate practices are wielding. And so again, we've got to stop using them, right? So I referred to this report earlier today for those of you that were on that earlier meeting that we had, and it refers to the United States Commission on Civil Rights, an investigation that they did and the report that they published in 2019. And they looked at the rates of exclusionary discipline and whether under what circumstances the school discipline and policies were unfairly and or unlawfully targeting students of color with disabilities. So I really appreciate that they not only look at whether or not they're targeted, but they look at it's unfair and it's unlawful. And so they analyzed responses, and what they found is that students of color as a whole, and even when you look at the individual racial groups, they do not engage in more disciplinable behaviors. And since they have been collecting this data since the 98-99 school year, there has been a consistent pattern of Black students and students with disabilities being disproportionately pushed out of schools as it relates to their counterparts. And then Black, Latino, and Native American students collectively receive substantially more school discipline and harsher and longer punishment than their white counterparts for like offenses. They don't just get more, they get more for the same offenses. And I mean, there are so many things that they found that were problematic. You know, I think I've got probably 5 slides of just all of the ways in which schools are disproportionately impacting students of color with disabilities as it relates to disciplinary exclusion practices. It doesn't matter the grade level, students with disabilities are twice as likely to get pushed out. It's consistent. The pattern is consistent, and it's higher for Black students with disabilities. Then the uneven application of disciplinary policies, it continues to be even more prevalent in low-income and urban communities. And out-of-school suspension, it's used most often for nonviolent offenses. And with the exception of Latin and Asian students, students of color were more likely than white students with disabilities to be expelled without any educational services at all. And I mean, we can blame a good portion of this on zero tolerance policies. You know, luckily here in Virginia, we're not so quick to push a school out or a student out of school for accidentally bringing a plastic knife to spread the butter on their bread or spread the condiments on their bread. But unfortunately, nevertheless, there have been instances of water guns being the premise for a child being expelled, a student having a possession of a substance that they should not have, but not by their own will, right? Students who have picked up something and you know, not knowing what they were picking up, but then being found in possession of a substance that they should not have on school property, expulsion still being the case in which, you know, the way that child was treated. And data also shows that alternative disciplinary methods are much more effective. And so if we know that something else works better, why are we continuing to use what does not work? It's harmful to educational attainment. It puts students at risk of experiencing so many other problems in their lives with education, economic, social, and not economic problems. It causes school avoidance, increases the likelihood that kids will drop out and that they will be involved in the justice system. So if we know that all of these negative consequences are what students are experiencing, then we have got to stop using this ineffective practice. So what are the implications? 73% of youth with emotional disabilities who drop out of school, within 3 years, they are involved in the justice system. They're arrested within 5 years. And Black students with disabilities, they constitute 19% of all of the students with disabilities, but overrepresented, they become 50% of students with disabilities in correctional facilities. You know, these are staggering data points that I'm sharing. These are staggering, right? And so what are we going to do about it? What is the answer? You know, just one more data point here. Black students 15 to 17 years old are only 21% of Virginia students, but they're 57% who are suspended. They're 49% that are referred to juvenile court by school authorities, 42% who are referred to juvenile intake officers. They're in local jails at 54%, and now the number is 68%. This is a couple of years old, but 68% of all of the young people incarcerated by DJJ are Black between the ages of 15 to 17. That's a problem. And so as of 2001, 1 of every 3 Black boys born that year can expect to go to prison in his lifetime. 1 in every 6 Latino boys, compared to 1 of every 17 white boys. So let's look at that disproportionality here in Virginia schools. And this data is also a couple of years old, but when we look at the disproportionality here, we look at African American females with disabilities, 14.7%. African American females without disabilities at 7.2%. But then look at African American boys with disabilities, it's 23.2%. And then when we look at let's just compare girls to girls with disabilities and then without. 14.7 for African American girls with, 3.7 for white females with, 23.2 for African American males with a disability, and it's 8.2 for African American males with a disability. And so boys are disciplined more harshly than girls. It doesn't matter how you dice this. But the fact that we would have such glaring disproportionality as it relates to our disciplinary practices, again, we have got to do better and do differently. Something isn't working. So again, what are we going to do about this problem? We've got to change how student behavior is addressed at the school level, because disproportionality, it's so pervasive. You know, we've got to challenge the way that we are doing things. And how do we do that? So let's make sure that whatever practices we're using, they are going to be trackable at the school level, so that we're able to see exactly what's happening, where it's happening, so that we can make changes in real time. How can we do that? If there are data management platforms that school divisions are using, and they're having to report this data already at the state level, right? So what if they began to run their own reports so that they can see where students potentially are getting in trouble? One example that this information gives is, what if they recognize that at the water fountain, or in the bathroom, or at lockers, if those are places where issues are happening during break time, during transition time, then you make sure that there are more support staff in those places at those times. And with the understanding that you aren't there to police these children, you aren't there to get these kids in trouble or get them into the office, but you're there to help make sure that they are successfully navigating the halls, successfully navigating transition, and not ending up in trouble. It literally is going to take a paradigm shift in the way children are being treated in school, because as long as we have this notion that, oh, if you're doing this or that behavior in the hallway, that's horseplay, and we've got to address it in a punitive manner, that's going to continue to yield the results that we are seeing right now. But when everyone in the school building is looking at interactions with young people as opportunities to support them, opportunities to give them what they need to be successful, making sure that every transition, whether it be within a classroom, from one classroom to another, into the building for school to begin, out of the building for school when school ends, that every transition is a positive one, that when you're engaged in the learning process, that we begin to think of that as from the moment a child gets on a bus to the moment that child is entering their homes, that every touch point from point A to point Z is a learning opportunity for students, and not one in which we are going to be policing students. That is the great paradigm shift that's got to happen. That, okay, perhaps this young person has not yet been successful at making a transition. Why is that? What are we going to put into place that is going to help this young person be successful? And if this didn't work, why didn't it work? Do we need to just tweak this one thing that we're doing, or do we need to begin to consider other things altogether? But nevertheless, we aren't looking at school as a place that punishment is an acceptable response to children who need to learn appropriate responses to stimuli, or appropriate ways to interact with their peers, appropriate ways to interact with administration or with teachers. Everything ought to be a learning experience for children in the school building. So another way we can make change is making changes to existing school board policies and procedures. And so we can all make changes to school board policy. Whether everyone knows it or not, there is absolutely no one who is excluded from being able to, number one, come to the school board meeting, to be able to review the policies of a particular school division. And if you identify something that you would like to see changed, then you have the ability to raise that. I would strongly advise that, you know, even if you do recognize something that needs changing, that you don't just go, you know, like the lone wolf to make that change, but that you begin to have conversations with other impacted parties. Have conversations with other parents. Make sure that there's an opportunity for the students who are impacted by these policies to get together so that their voices are included in the conversation for making change. And then and if you are able, if you have good relationships with school board members, then invite even those folks to the conversation so that they can be a part of steering the conversation in the right direction. So this is what I would say. Oh, here we go. You want to learn as much about the policy that you want to change as you can. You want to make sure that you are able to identify why that rule exists and how you would want to change it, or how you would want to eliminate it, or how you would want to potentially rewrite it. And then you want to make sure that it wasn't you as an individual, but it was a collective effort of those who are impacted by it. And then, but also with those who have the authority to help you make that change at all. So then, with your policy recommendations, they've got to be submitted in writing, and it's got to be prior to that school board meeting. So I know that in Richmond, you've got to submit it at least, you know what, let me not tell you inaccurate information, but I know it is at least one day before. You can't submit it the same day and anticipate that it's going to be heard that day. I would suggest that you give them a week so that they have the opportunity to review whatever recommendation that you've got. And then once it is heard, make sure that you're there. Make sure that all of the voices that help to collaborate on whatever this change is going to be, make sure that they're all there and that they're there and ready to testify as to why they believe that this is an appropriate change to make. So it only takes a majority vote to adopt a change. Okay, I'm frozen here. Oh, there we go. There we go. So everything that I have been saying, this is basically saying it just in a timeline. You want to get the data. And if we're talking about suspensions and expulsions, referrals, arrests, you want to get all of that information, and then you can actually ask for it to be disaggregated. So, you know exactly how many African-American students, how many Latinx students, how many students of Middle Eastern descent, how many Native American students. You want that information as disaggregated as possible so that you're able to then highlight and take note of any disparities that you see. And who do you want in the work group that's going to be doing this? Students, parents, school staff, central office staff, board members, local experts. And when you start talking about who you want to come to the table to be a part of this conversation, don't leave out the folks that don't have students in school. Don't leave out the potential parents to be, the grandparents, if you will, but make sure that every voice from the community is represented in the conversation. That way, there is no room for, well, have we considered? Yes, we have considered. This is a collective response from the community. And so once you have all of those components, once you have all of the information, you have your work group, then, like I was just saying, you want to discuss the challenges and opportunities, right? You want to make sure that you have anticipated the what ifs that you might hear from the board. You want to consider all of the ways in which the school board that you're going to be presenting this information to, you want to have contemplated as many of the objections or the challenges that may arise as possible. You want to make sure that you have as many allies on board as possible, and especially those sitting on the board, especially those community partners who potentially have a resource that they can bring to bear on the situation. And then we've already talked about soliciting input from all of the stakeholders. And then your action plan, that is going to be, okay, what is it that we're trying to do? If we have this lofty goal of rewriting a complete policy, are you going to have some give and take, right? This is a particular something that we might be able to leave in for now. We'll come after it later, but these 4 items we want to make sure are changed when, as we amend this school board policy. Are there going to be ways in which you've got to make sure that you're informing the public? When is it going to happen? What school board meeting is it going to happen at? And then you need to make sure that folks have an opportunity to give public comment, right? Whether they show up at the board meeting and speak, letting them know, hey, you got to get signed up by a certain time, or whether they're going to submit written comment, making sure that they know what time they've got to get that written comment in. And then what if folks want to have conversations and just make sure that they're able to express themselves in such a way that it's going to be helpful? And so make sure that you have a team who is ready and willing to support anyone that's wanting to add their voice to the challenge, right? To the fight. Know the players and how the game is played, right? Learn everything you can about the structure of the school system and the personalities within it, right? If you know that at your particular school you have a really engaged administration, and you're wanting to make a change and you know it's going to impact your particular school, then you might want to have a conversation with that principal. You might want to have a conversation with the assistant principal and make sure that they are in the know about what it is that you're attempting to do, that they're on board with it. And if they aren't an ally, you want to find out as much about their opposition as possible. Why don't they agree with this change that you're attempting to make? And if they don't agree and you understand the why of it, is there an opportunity for you to then convince them otherwise by providing them data? Will their minds change? And if their mind isn't going to change, make sure you have enough supporting data for the policy change that you're attempting to make, so that their objection, it of course will be heard, but it won't carry the weight against the data that you're able to put forward that supports what you're attempting to do, the change you're trying to make. And then most systems, they're hierarchies, right? And hierarchies have protocols, rules about who you're going to contact first, who's making the decisions, and you don't want to offend anyone. You might need to make sure, you definitely need to make sure that you aren't going to burn any bridges, and especially they might be folks who would be on your side if indeed you had respected them enough to reach out and let them know what you were going to be doing. Hopefully we're not dealing with such sensitive personalities, but even if you are careful about the way you're operating and being very conscientious of what the protocol is and notifying folks, then you are less likely then to run afoul of someone's sensitivities. And you've got to be willing to play the long game, right? Rome wasn't built in a day, and sometimes policies don't change in a day. You've got to be persistent. Administration, they may change. The people who you're dealing with, they may change. Administrative change can take a long time. So imagine that you're dealing with this principal and this school board, and then elections happen and you're dealing with a whole nother group. You were making headway with the first group, and now you're having to maybe not start from scratch, but you're having to once again kind of hit some of those same points. Be willing to recognize that administrative change, it does take time. And you are going to keep pushing, and you're going to basically change the narrative, right? You're going to change the way folks are even considering students and how best to address their behaviors. And once you change the culture, then it becomes even more amenable to changing the policy portion of it. If you can get a principal's mind to change about the way they're going to operate in their school, and it's going to be much more trauma-informed and embracing children and all of their differences and making space for cultural differences and not using punitive measures to address behaviors that may need to change, it's going to be, again, a lot easier to then go to the school board and say, hey, we recognize that this policy says X, Y, Z. It's not even aligned with the culture of our schools. And so we need to make this change. And we have taken the time to get the voices of community. And you will see that so many community members are here and are going to speak on these changes that need to be made. It takes time to build those allyships. You've got to do it, though. You've got to make sure that the families that are impacted are on board, and those that are not impacted. That's important because oftentimes, you know, you've got parents to be, like I said, you've got folks who potentially may have even been a part of the administration, whether they ever have kids or not. But a community is so much more than just the families of children who are engaged in school. And so make sure that you invite all of the community to making the changes that you want to see happen. There are two types of power. I said this earlier, money power and people power. And in the school context, people will most often win the day because they equate to votes. Isn't that right? I mean, that school board member, they need to make sure that they are doing what is most appropriate for the folks that live in their jurisdiction. And so that's going to be true of every single school board member. So when you are building your allyships, you make sure that you are looking at what area does each school board member know exactly who their constituents are, and you make sure that you have representation from each of those districts. So not one of them is off the hook to move in the way that you need them to move. So when it becomes a legislative matter, because sometimes it's not the school board that's going to be able to make the changes that we need to see, right? So the definition of offenses and the degrees of severity that fall under the state court jurisdiction, they're defined by statute. And then the parameters for school discipline, also defined by statute. The parameters for the offenses, even if they're committed in the community, but that have to be reported to the school administration, that's also defined by statute. So those are the three very concrete times when you're going to be talking to legislators about the changes that you want to make versus presenting that information to a school board. So some legislative changes that have happened recently, limiting the use of suspension and expulsion, that was great, right? Matter of fact, getting long-term suspension down from all the way up to 364 days down to 45 days, from that 11 to 364 to 11 to 45, that was huge, right? And then limiting the use of suspension for pre-K to third grade, which is just outrageous that we would want to use it anyway, but nevertheless, limiting that use. And then the removal of the disorderly conduct as an offense that children could be charged with in school. Those were all great, but we still got a long way to go. We've still got work that needs to be done. And we need to recognize that legislative advocacy is year-round, because you've got to be researching targets, meaning those legislators. You need to know where the legislators that you need to have conversations, who's on the education committee. You need to know that. And so research and know where these legislators stand on the issues of importance to you. And this can be a gateway to building alliances, because if you are aligned on particular issues, that means you're going to be able to say, you know what, I really appreciate that you stand, this is your stance on X, Y, and Z, even if it isn't related to school. You need to know where they stand on every issue so that you can talk about your similarities before you might have to have a conversation about changes that you're wanting to make that you might have to do some convincing. And then be a provider of information and a facilitator of valuable connections. So when you come and you talk about a bill that you want to ask this particular legislator to either support or to patron, you make sure that you come with enough information so that they are able to see the efficacy of this change that you're wanting to make. And if they have mentioned something, or if you have found out that they are submitting a particular bill and you have insider information, you make sure that you bring that so that you can provide them information that is going to be of support to other work that they're doing. That way they see the value in building relationship with you. And then if there are other organizations that you may be affiliated with or that you have connections to that would also be beneficial to a particular legislator, bring that information as well. Have already had the conversations with those other organizations so that they are ready and willing to be connected with this particular legislator, because it's really important that they see the value that you add, not just in the legislation that you're there to present, but that you are a multifaceted added value to them, to their work, and to their particular stances on different issues. And then these are also ways that you strengthen ties with legislators, right? When you bring that extra value, you will strengthen your ties to them. And you want to strengthen with the ones that already support, and you want to build with those who become new supporters. You want to even build with those who have in the past or who may potentially not be in agreement with everything that you've got to say, but who potentially will just see the value in checking with you on different things, right? Hearing your perspective because they see that you are a well-rounded advocate. So yeah, you've got to recognize common ground and look for ways to align forces whenever possible, even when they're at odds. So whether you are working to create change in policy, or whether you are looking to make legislative change, whether you're looking to change the environment in a particular school that eventually will lead to policy or procedural change, you've got to remember that communities that will power together, that is when their voice is going to be heard. You know, your greatest power, it's always going to be in togetherness. So I want to share Rise for Youth's legislative agenda. I have shared my slide deck, and it's going to be distributed to you all. And I am hoping that you will find the issue that matters to you. You will find your passion in what we're fighting for, and we'll be able to fight together this 2022 session. I really hope so. And so now I would love to entertain any questions that anyone may have.
Thank you, Valerie. We have one from Steve in the chat. He asks, is the prevalence in Virginia of schools calling law enforcement instead of less restrictive means something that can be addressed with the courts if those schools don't change things administratively or legislatively?
You know, I have had conversations with particular judges who have said, you know what, I am tired of seeing particular things come before me. And, you know, I would say that the best way to start is with the Commonwealth attorneys, because they're also getting tired. We've got relationships built with some, with Richmond Commonwealth attorney, with some of the Northern Virginia, and even a couple of the Hampton Roads Commonwealth attorneys that are just determined not to push these things forward when they come before them. It would be great if we'd be able to get judges to just say to school divisions, hey, stop it. But you know, once it comes before them, they can choose not to move it forward. But it's the Commonwealth Attorney's Office that is going to be our greatest ally in keeping kids from entering deeper into the system when we have school divisions that are determined to push a kid into the court system. And so I did not mention Commonwealth attorneys, but they can become huge allies in that particular space.
That's really interesting. I hadn't thought about it that way either, but it makes sense. Valerie Jones also has a question in the chat. She says, in your opinion, would you say disproportionate disciplinary actions, seclusion and restraint, and school to prison pipeline go hand in hand in a sense? Also, would you say that because of undiagnosed mental disabilities, minority students are getting the short end of the stick, so to say? So kind of two questions in one there.
I will say, first of all, yes. Disciplinary actions, seclusion, restraint, they, and the school to prison pipeline all go hand in hand, right? Because if a student is secluded or restrained, so imagine a child with a disability is being restrained, and it's an officer that's handling this student, and that student jerks and brushes against this officer, then all of a sudden this is a student who could potentially be facing felony charges. All of a sudden this student potentially is facing assault on a police officer. And it is not that the wildest thing ever, right? And kids, once they're pushed out, if they are pushed out of school, all of a sudden they're not getting access to the education. They come back and they're behind. They're acting out because they don't want to be embarrassed for not knowing the information. They get kicked out again. Before you know it, they don't want to come back. And now there's truancy. I mean, it can spiral out of control from many different angles. Even if the child does come back and attempt to stay engaged, if they act out, they've now been kind of targeted as, oh, that troublemaker kid. And so now the child rolls their eyes and the teacher's ready to send them to the principal's office, or the security officer's coming. And so we have all seen it, right? We have all seen how students get kind of targeted. And, you know, they're targeted in ways that aren't helpful, aren't healthy, and that continue to push kids into the school to prison pipeline. And then undiagnosed mental disabilities, that's a whole nother thing. You know, earlier today, the presentation was about trauma and recognizing that trauma-informed care is the way to deal with children, because it doesn't focus on a particular incident. It focuses on the whole child, what's going on in that child's life. Has this child experienced ACEs? Has that child experienced trauma? And are these trauma responses and not just a child acting out? And so until we stop being punitive in our treatment of students, until we stop and say, it's always a learning experience. And sometimes we are the ones learning. Sometimes we are the ones that are having to take a look at, okay, this is a student and these are the behaviors this child is exhibiting. Let's take a look, what's going on in that community? We shouldn't even always just automatically assume that there are problems in the home. What if the problem is in the community? What if this is a child who's being bullied or is just having a hard time even getting to school because of all of the influences that are pressing negatively against this child? What is this child carrying? What is the burden? Or, you're right, undiagnosed mental disabilities. So what if indeed mental health is a taboo in this particular family? And we've just not even recognized that there are issues that need to be addressed. All of these are instances that we have to intervene in pushing kids into the court, pushing kids out of school, pushing kids into jail. And so I really appreciate your question, because yes, minority students are getting the short end of the stick because unfortunately, the knee-jerk response when it comes to a minority student, oh, they're a bad egg. You know, we got to get them out of here. They're bringing our test scores down. They're disrupting the learning environment for other students. And what has proven to be true and what data demonstrates is that when you exclude a child from school, that doesn't create the perfect serene learning environment that you anticipate it's going to create. It doesn't even yield that result. And you certainly don't yield it for the students that are getting pushed out. And so if we eliminate these practices, we won't have to worry about disproportionality. We'll then have to stop thinking we've got an easy fix, and it'll force us to do the hard work, the real work of addressing the needs of every student.
Awesome, thank you. Those are the only questions in the chat. I'm not sure if anyone else has anything to add or ask. And I know you mentioned your contact information is right there, and we'll receive the PowerPoint, so we'll know how to get in touch with you if any questions come up.
Yes, yes, indeed. Well, thank you all for having me. It has been a pleasure. And yeah, my contact information is there. And yeah, I'm here.